And welcome back on Take Action News. This Saturday, March 16th, beautiful afternoon. We want to give a shout out to all of our listeners and viewers here in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, listening to us now on 1480 AM, We Act Radio and WeActRadio.com. With me in studio is Rich Webster, our excellent and competent and talented board operator and technical manager, and of course David Shuster is with us in the contributor chair. We've got a lot ahead of us this hour. We're going to be covering a lot of important issues. We'll be talking about the future of too big to fail banks. Is there a bipartisan consensus to unravel them? And a Senate investigation this week, a Senate hearing rather, based on a report that the $6 billion trade loss that JP Morgan Chase suffered last year was the result of deliberate loosening of the bank's own internal controls and stonewalling of the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, which was in charge of regulating the bank and that loss. Some intense questioning by Senator Carl Levin of Michigan. We're going to hear some of that and talk about that. We're also going to run through some of the highlights of CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, going on right now in National Harbor, Maryland, here in the Washington, D.C. area. It's sort of an annual conservative Woodstock, if there's such a thing, in which really all the great sort of the conservative activists meet, and a lot of top Republican and conservative political leaders speak in front of that audience and seek sort of validation from the rank and file and the grassroots. We'll talk about a little bit about whether this was a forum for change and reform in the Republican Party, particularly on the issue of immigration. Donald Trump spoke about that, said some interesting things, some controversial things. Or whether it was more of the same. And then finally, in our third and fourth segments at around 1:30, we're going to be talking with Dr. Maya Rockeymoore and Catherine Mangu Ward of Reason Magazine. They're going to be debating New York City's now overturned ban on sugary soda drinks of a certain size. And then Dr. Rockeymoore is going to stick around to talk with us about an attack that was made on her in Washington Post and respond. It's exciting stuff. But first, there was a very fascinating article reported on U.S. News & World Report this week in the Washington Whispers column by a reporter named Elizabeth Flock. Former DEA chiefs, apparently, again, that's the Drug Enforcement Agency, are taking an active role in opposing the effort to legalize and loosen restrictions on marijuana. Yes, apparently Robert DuPont and Peter Bensinger, who were both administrators of the Drug Enforcement Agency back in the 1970s, under Presidents Nixon and Ford, belonged to a firm called Bensinger, DuPont and Associates that provides, guess what it does, specializes in workplace drug testing. Workplace drug testing. So they have a clear financial conflict of interest in lobbying against repealing prohibition or lobbying for prohibition of marijuana. They deny that they believe and so of course they've submitted a letter, or rather signed a letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee criticizing the Obama administration for failing to respond to these new state laws legalizing and loosening our marijuana prohibition laws. And they've really sort of come to the forefront of the fight against repeal of marijuana prohibition. Marijuana advocates are sort of up in arms and say that even if they don't have a direct, even if they're supporting it purely on policy grounds, these are people that also have a personal interest in this, and that it's as if they're securing their legacy, much like sort of, let's say, a J. Edgar Hoover type or an Elliot Ness would be interested in fighting against the repeal of prohibition of alcohol in the 30s because they fought for so much of their careers to enforce the alcohol laws at the time. David Shuster, is this out of line? Is this just typical Washington revolving door politics at its worst?
Wow. You know what? This is one of these issues, Daniel, where again, it happens a lot. I understand it, but it's one of those that is reprehensible. I mean, in an ideal world, this would never happen, but unfortunately, it feels like we've moved from aspirational sort of environment that we want in Washington. Now we just sort of accept it because that's how it goes.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I guess, how do you end the revolving door is a real question. But, I think that we're going to win on this. I think that there are a lot of, what legal pot looks like is something to be seen and how we're going to figure out that and navigate it. And can we make it as inconvenient to get as cigarettes once it is legal and everything like that, and public safety and public health issues. These are all very important things. But, the drug testing regime That's not something we often hear about. I mean, we certainly hear about the policemen's unions and the private prisons that have an interest in this. There are so many stakeholders that have an interest in maintaining prohibition. Have you ever been drug tested, David?
No, I've never been drug tested, although almost once in one of the just because of an application for a security thing that I had to do. But there's always been fears about it, and the whole idea of drug testing. I think, okay, fine, maybe we want to drug test people who have critical roles because of what the job that they have. But just in terms of random drug testing or just drug testing people in general,
right?
It's a ridiculous.
It's certainly it's very invasive, David. In just a few seconds, we're gonna be joined by our affiliate stations. Welcome them in Chicago, Columbus, Grand Rapids, parts of Oklahoma, of course across the country. But tune in, watch us live on TakeActionNews.com.